Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Scoop podcast with Sam and Jordan. Today, we will be continuing our conversation of Sam's basketball movie bracket. So this is part 2. Sam will be going over 16 movies in this episode, determining which one is the best and will advance to the final 4. I'll kind of be listening in and we'll ask a couple of questions here and there, and I have a couple of opinions and thoughts to share. But for the most part, this will mostly be kind of Sam talking for a little bit, so go for it.
Yes, I'm excited. So I'm not sure how long these episodes will end up being, but I'm going to do my best to stay on topic and be concise on how this will go. I actually have a lot of notes with a lot of info and opinions. And then we will also link my letterbox list in the description of this episode if you want to see the full list of 68 movies. Before we get into the movies, I wanted to explain how the matchups were determined. I came up with 4 different regions. So for this episode today, we will be discussing the culturally iconic region, which these are going to be movies that most people have seen or heard about, and films that stretch beyond basketball and beyond film. It's not so much that all 16 of these movies are good examples of basketball or film culture, but they are good representations of the societal culture around basketball within the context of film. A lot of these films have actual NBA players acting in them. Some have remakes or sequels about them, and others have just remained in the basketball movie conversation since they premiered. There will be films in the other 3 regions that we will discuss in the future that could be in this culturally iconic region, but I had to kind of be loose with it and spread out some of the bad movies because I didn't want to just put 16 good movies that everyone's heard about in this region. I kind of wanted to spread out some of the bad movies because one of the things about all these basketball movies is, most of them are mid or bad, so I didn't want to have too many bad movies in one region. As far as coming up with the matchups, since I hadn't seen most of these movies before, I went with more of a conversation angle instead of ranking them 1 through 16. Some matchups have a clear winner, while others will be more of a battle of discussion. I also wanted to structure these podcasts to where I'll mention the matchups, but for movies that advance, I will talk more about them in the next rounds. So as we go through these 8 first-round matchups, I will talk about the basic elements of both films, explain more about why one falls short to the other one. By the end of the episode, we will have one film that wins this culturally iconic region, and that film will go into the final 4, which I'll have. So I'll have 3 more episodes after this one that go over the other regions, and then I might make a separate episode that's just the final 4, or I might tack the final 4 onto the last regions episode. And I might also have a bonus episode after all these where I rank the NBA players and their acting performances, because I think it's an interesting conversation. But with all that being said, should we begin?
Sure.
The first matchup will be He Got Game from 1998 versus The Luck of the Irish 2001. Now, I talked about The Luck of the Irish in the introduction episode previous to this. I think it was funny to put this in the culturally iconic region because unless you grew up on DCOM movies, Disney Channel original movies, you probably haven't even heard of this movie. But the whole idea of the main character in The Luck of the Irish, he's trying to find out his cultural heritage, but too bad for him, it turns out he's a leprechaun. Or he comes from leprechauns. He Got Game is going to win this matchup. He Got Game is the Spike Lee and Denzel Washington movie, and we'll talk more about that later. But it's definitely better than Luck of the Irish. Okay, so He Got Game moves on to the second round. So now we will discuss one of the more interesting and difficult matchups in the first round, which is Air Bud versus Teen Wolf. There are a lot of funny similarities and differences with these 2 movies, so I had to put them against each other. As we talk right now, I'm not really sure which one's going to win. So Air Bud is from 1997. This is where a boy finds a stray golden retriever and figures out he can boop a basketball in his nose into the basket.
Boop.
Yeah. It turns out the dog was a lost companion of a mean clown and his little performances at birthday parties. And there's a scene at the end where Bud has to choose between the boy and the clown. But as far as basketball is concerned, there's only a few games and practices in Air Bud. And Air Bud only really plays the last game of the movie. And this is where we get one of the most iconic lines in canine basketball history, where the referee says, "Ain't no rules say the dog can't play basketball."
I didn't know that was an iconic line.
Yeah, so at the start of the last game, they have the dog dressed up. He has the K9 jersey. He's got little tiny dog shoes on, which are really cute and funny. But they try to sub him into the game, and the opponent coach is upset and is like, "This is ridiculous." And there's like this little 5-second part where the referee has this rule book and he's just flipping through it, and he's just like, "Ain't no rules say dogs can't play basketball." But then the rest of the game, the opponent coach and one of the parents on the other team, they're just like constantly screaming and mad about this dog running around. I think the coach says, "Will someone cover this dog?" And then they say, "My mother could cover that dog," like on defense. But they never really say, "Oh, it's a golden retriever." Like, as soon as the kid gets the dog, his mom's like, "We can't keep him. You have to put up signs that he's lost." So he just puts up, "Found a lost yellow dog." They don't even say it's a golden retriever. But yeah, I rewatched some of this today, and there's a lot more non-basketball scenes than basketball scenes. And that kind of goes for a lot of these movies, but it's definitely something to critique. Air Bud was a Disney-made family movie. It actually made $27 million at the box office on a budget of $3 million, even though there wasn't a lot of Hollywood-level talent working on it. And then for Teen Wolf, this is from 1985, starring Michael J. Fox. This came out about 6 weeks after the first Back to the Future did in theaters, which I didn't know was that close. Like, Back to the Future was July and Teen Wolf was late August. But Teen Wolf made similar money to Air Bud, about $30 million, but that was like 10% of what Back to the Future made, which was $388 million. And I also found it funny that Teen Wolf's opening weekend at the box office, they made $6.1 million, but Back to the Future won the week at $6.9 million, so not even the first weekend of the box office could Teen Wolf beat Back to the Future. And that was just a quick box office detour. I'm not going to do that for all the movies, but I just thought that was kind of funny. Yeah, so in Teen Wolf, Michael J. Fox plays for his high school basketball team, and he's really bad. Then one day, he kind of randomly turns into a werewolf, and it's like if he gets really angry, he'll start to have little werewolf outbursts, like he'll sprout little hair or get long fingernail claws or have red glowing eyes. He has a moment with his dad where his dad shows him he's a werewolf too. They don't go into as many details as even like The Luck of the Irish does with the leprechaun transformations in that movie. It's just like he can become a werewolf whenever he wants, and that's kind of the movie. This makes him really good at basketball because he has more strength, but it also for some reason makes him shoot better and have better dribbling moves just because he's a werewolf. So they win a lot of games. They go to the championship game. He basically quits the basketball team and he quits being the wolf, as what they call him, at the dance. There's a subplot about which girl he's going to end up with, and he ends up with his longtime friend at the end. And then he rejoins the team at the championship game, but he plays as himself, not the wolf. And he makes the winning free throws. So when comparing these two films, they actually both had many sequels, none of which have anything to do with basketball, which I thought was really funny. Obviously, with Air Bud, you have him playing all the other sports like baseball and football, and there's a ton. And then there's also a lot of movies about his puppies that have adventures in different movies.
Like Snow Buddies?
Snow Buddies, Spooky Buddies, Santa Buddies. Yeah, we watched Spooky Buddies before.
I would watch them with my siblings growing up, too. Because that was kind of the era of, like, all the Buddies movies was, like, the early aughts.
Yeah, Air Bud kind of like had a late 90s, early 2000s stranglehold on family entertainment when it comes to dogs and sports. So pretty much if you grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s and you like dogs and sports, you actually liked Air Bud. There's a great YouTube video by this creator, Karsten, where he made a video about all the Air Bud movies. You should check that out. There's a Teen Wolf 2, TOO, where a young Jason Bateman, of all people, plays the cousin of Michael J. Fox, but instead of playing basketball, he plays boxing. And then there's a 2011 MTV remake show, but they play lacrosse. And finally, there's another Teen Wolf remake movie that actually came out last year on Paramount Plus, but that also doesn't have basketball. So I just found it very interesting that both Air Bud and Teen Wolf have all these sequels and none of them have to do with basketball.
Yeah. And consequently, that's the ones I'm aware of more.
Yeah, so I think it would advance Air Bud because like it's an actual dog playing basketball, so it's hard to like top that. And what cachet Michael J. Fox had in the summer of 1985, I think it all went into Back to the Future. And I think if Teen Wolf came out a year earlier or after, it may have been a bigger hit. But I would recommend watching both of these movies at least once if you haven't seen them. But that means we will have He Got Game versus Air Bud in round 2. But we will table that discussion for now. And we will move on to the next matchup, which will be Like Mike from 2002 and the Red Sneakers, also from 2002. And, how can I not put these two films together when they both came out in 2002 and they're both about wearing magical basketball sneakers to become good at basketball? I think this is an easy win for Like Mike, starring, of course, Lil Bow Wow and also a young Jesse Plemons, and Brenda Song is also in it. Like Mike is one of the basketball movies I watched as a kid, and it has definitely stuck with me for 20 years now. I'll talk a little more about it later, but for the movie The Red Sneakers, only 86 people have marked this as watched on Letterboxd. Some of these movies, not a lot of people have seen. I only gave it 1.5 stars. It originally aired on Showtime in February 2002, so it doesn't even have a theatrical release. The only actor that I knew that was in it was Vincent D'Onofrio, who plays in the show Law & Order: Criminal Intent. It's just really boring, and you can tell the production quality is low, and it makes sense it wasn't a theatrical release. So Like Mike advances. There is a sequel to Like Mike called Like Mike 2 Street Ball, but it has none of the cast from the first movie, so I skipped that one. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Blue Chips from 1994 versus Thunderstruck from 2012. I recently watched this movie, Thunderstruck, which is the Kevin Durant movie. He played for the Oklahoma City Thunder during this time, and there's this kid named Brian in the movie who wins a chance to shoot a half-court shot at the Thunder game. But he misses it, and the ball hits off the mascot's head, and Kevin Durant picks it up and signs it and gives it to Brian. And Brian says along the lines of, "I wish I had your talent." And Durant responds basically like, "Talent is working hard." And then all of a sudden this blue light transfers from Kevin Durant to Brian, and so all the basketball talent now resides in this teenager who is played by Taylor Gray, who became the voice of an animated Star Wars character, Ezra Bridger, on the Star Wars Rebels. But anyway, the rest of the movie, this kid, he becomes the top Oklahoma high school basketball player in like the span of a month, while Kevin Durant can't make a shot in the NBA. Jim Belushi is the kid's coach, and he's kind of funny. He has a few moments. But Kevin Durant has an agent in the film, and he figures out that Brian somehow took his talent, and they basically have to figure out how to transfer it back, which they do at the end, and Kevin Durant's able to make shots again. So Brian goes back to school and has no talent, and he's bad, and he's in the championship game. and he basically plays as his bad self, but he makes the game-winning shot. And there was a funny review on Letterboxd about what this Brian kid would have felt if he knew Kevin Durant was going to sign with the Golden State Warriors, because this is a very Oklahoma City Thunder propaganda movie, which I think is pretty funny because, you know, they were the Seattle Sonics for so long, and then an Oklahoma Oil person bought the team, and they moved it to Oklahoma City. And that happened in like literally 2008. So this movie came out 4 years later. So just imagine like your favorite sports team goes to a different city, and then within 4 years there's a movie about that team. Like, I would be really mad if I was a Seattle Sonics fan about this movie. But one of the many similarities with a lot of these movies is that the main character sucks at basketball. They get some sort of unique talent or advantage and then become really good, and they lead their team to the championship game. But ultimately, they give back their advantage before the last game, and then they win that last game as themselves. I've seen so many movies already that have had a very similar ending. So it's kind of cliche at this point, but so yeah, Thunderstruck was pretty mid to below mid. It felt like another DCOM movie, but with the backing of Kevin Durant and the NBA behind it. It was tolerable, just not something I would rewatch. So it's going to lose to this first round matchup with Blue Chips. So that means Blue Chips will be facing off against Like Mike in the next round. And so we move on, and now the next matchup is Uncle Drew from 2018 versus The Cookout from 2004. Uncle Drew is a movie starring NBA player Kyrie Irving, and it's literally based off a Pepsi commercial in which Kyrie plays an older version of himself called Uncle Drew. I'll talk a little bit more about it because it's going to ultimately beat The Cookout. The Cookout is very interesting and noteworthy participant in this bracket, but it's just not that good. It has a lot of random, decent celebrity appearances, like actors, but like it's got Tim Meadows, Queen Latifah, Ja Rule, and Danny Glover plays this old neighbor who's upset with the loud noises of the cookout going on next door. So Danny Glover's character has a white wife in the film played by Farrah Fawcett, and this is actually her last acting credit. Farrah Fawcett, the actress from I think the 70s, was when she was more popular. The main character is played by Karan Pinder, or also known as Stormy P. He does not have a Wikipedia page, and so like when I was watching this movie, I was like, I don't know who this is. I tried to look it up, and for some reason they have Ja Rule as top billed, so like I couldn't understand why he was top billed when he's like not the main character. But basically the Cookout is about this guy who becomes the number one draft pick to the New Jersey Nets, and the whole movie is set during that summer where he gets his first big money contract and starts buying new things and getting a new house. And so he basically gets this new big house and has a family cookout. So no real basketball is actually being played in this movie, so that kind of definitely lost points there. Queen Latifah has a small part as a security guard for the community of big houses where this guy lives at now, and she's kind of funny. She takes her job way too seriously. I don't think I'll be rewatching this one anytime soon. Yeah, The Cookout. Not that great. So Uncle Drew is going to advance, and they will face the winner of Above the Rim from 1994 or Crossover from 2006. So I watched Above the Rim for the first time the other night, and it was a most welcome sight because, again, most of these movies are bad, and Above the Rim was pretty good. So it's obviously going to be Crossover. So there's this movie called Crossover from 2006. Very low budget, poor quality. It does have Anthony Mackie, who would later become Falcon in the Avengers movies. He's a street baller in some underground league. It looks like they play at some abandoned mall. It's really weird because they go to this weird like location. They just like go down these stairs, and there's just like this basketball court and all these trash cans on fire, and like it's really weirdly lit, but Wayne Brady, of all people, plays kind of this villain who's just trying to make the most money from the street ball league, and it just has a weird aesthetic about it. It wasn't entertaining. I couldn't understand what was at stake. They did have some decent basketball playing sequences, because there's actually like 2 or 3 games of street ball kind of that they're playing. But I just gave it 2 stars. I didn't really like it. Okay, so we have 2 more first round matchups, and they're both originals versus remakes. We have Space Jam from 1996 versus Space Jam: A New Legacy 2021. And then our last matchup in the first round will be White Men Can't Jump from 1992 versus White Men Can't Jump from 2023. So we'll talk about the Space Jams first, and I'll let you talk for a little bit, because I've talked for a while, and I know you've seen Space Jam. So what are your Space Jam 1996 thoughts?
I need to revisit this soon, because it's honestly a movie that I really, really like. Does it hold up? I can't really speak for that, but I do feel like Space Jam is very, I don't know what to describe it as, but just it's like the most 90s thing I can possibly think of in one movie is just Space Jam. The soundtrack alone is just very, very, very of the 90s. And I think like this spawned so much like just like merch and stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
this was a big merch movie.
Big merch movie for the 90s. Like, I can't think of another merch movie in the 90s. So, yeah, I would really like to revisit it soon. But, does it hold up? I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't watch this when I grew up. For some reason, it just never was on the radar for me.
Which is so bizarre to me.
So I watched it a few years ago for the first time, and it just didn't land with me. And then I watched the remake with LeBron James that came out post-pandemic on HBO Max, and I kind of liked that one a little bit more. But I think, with what the first Space Jam did, and I really like the 2D Looney Tunes more than the 3D Looney Tunes, and I think the new Legacy Space Jam, like, there's this weird element of Don Cheadle being like an AI algorithm dude. And like, I'll be honest, one of the things the original Space Jam I didn't care for was just like I get if you're a kid and it's like, oh, the aliens are going to come and take the basketball talent and beat the Looney Tunes. But I guess that concept kind of works better than the LeBron James one. But ultimately, I don't think either of these movies are good. I understand the cultural ramifications of the first one a lot more, even though I didn't watch it in the 90s. But I think it's clear that one should advance. And I know you've seen it, so it's kind of easier to advance the one you've seen. But I do remember this part in the newer Space Jam where Foghorn Leghorn pretends to be the mother of dragons from Game of Thrones, because Warner Brothers was just like, let's put all of our IP in this movie. And there's like a 2-second clip of like the crazy dudes from the Clockwork Orange movie in just on the sidelines, because they're technically Warner Brothers property or IP. So
children aren't gonna know what that
no.
is.
Yeah, so there's a ton of that in that movie, whereas the original Space Jam is more
for the kids,
forthcoming. And like, obviously you have Michael Jordan, the first one, and then you have a lot of other 90s NBA players. And then, I forgot Zendaya was in the new Space Jam as well. But yeah, I think we're going to have the first Space Jam advance. But it's not going to win the next round. I can just already tell you that. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the last matchup in the first round. And this is thankfully going a little bit quicker than I thought. So that's White Men Can't Jump. So I watched the original 1992 version, I think last year or 2 years ago for the first time. I really, really liked it. And it's going to win in this matchup because the remake with Jack Harlow that came out last year, it was actually better than I thought. I gave it 3 stars, but it's not as good as the first one. I think the beats matched up very similarly. Obviously, it's a remake, but like the basketball part of it worked, but they kind of like made Jack Harlow like super crunchy, and like he's basically training basketball players because he's an ex-college player who got hurt. But the other people in the new White Men Can't Jump, like it just didn't land with me. Like it had the first time director Calmatic, who I don't even know who that is, and the main guy who was basically playing the Wesley Snipes character is Sinquala Walls. So yeah, I don't know what else he's been in, but yeah, I'm gonna say that the original is better, so that one's gonna advance. All right, so now we're gonna take a quick little break, and we will start round 2 after this. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next round of the culturally iconic region in my basketball movie bracket. So first we have He Got Game versus Air Bud, and although I like a dog playing basketball, it's clear that He Got Game got more game than a dog, so Spike Lee moves on. Then we have Like Mike versus Blue Chips, and I'm also going to go ahead and move on Blue Chips. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but let's quickly have a moment for Like Mike here. I mean, when you're 10 years old and you love sports and you see a movie about a young, aspiring rapper finding magical Michael Jordan shoes to get his way out of adoption and become a player in the NBA, like, the way they had little 4-foot whatever little Bow Wow running on the NBA court making shots and dunking, it was really funny. They actually had a lot of NBA players in this movie. Crispin Glover is the villain, and he's actually really good in that movie. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there's a young Jesse Plemons who's now become a really good actor in the 2020s. So yeah, I think it's definitely iconic to the culture, and if you haven't seen it, you gotta see it. But it's not better than Blue Chips, so that will advance. So now we'll have Uncle Drew versus Above the Rim. And Uncle Drew was kind of lucky. I had to give the Uncle Drew another bad movie to go against, so, you know, I've only seen Uncle Drew one time. It was kind of mid, but I thought it was somewhat funny at moments. It has a little Rel Howery, and then it also has Tiffany Haddish and Nick Kroll, but then you also have like Shaquille O'Neal, Reggie Miller, Aaron Gordon of the Denver Nuggets is also in this movie. I just find it really weird. So like Kyrie Irving, a little timeline for Kyrie Irving. In 2016, he had one of the biggest shots in basketball history in the NBA Finals when the Cavaliers beat the Warriors in 2016. The next year, 2017, he basically is in a Pepsi commercial as this Uncle Drew character where he has a white gray beard and hair, and he like acts as an old man even though he's 20-something-year-old Kyrie Irving. It's really weird. And for a, soda commercial, even if you don't care for it, it's like a 30-second thing, but then they're like, let's make an hour-and-a-half movie. It's basically, Little Rel Howery is kind of the main character. He's like a basketball coach in Harlem, and he encounters this Uncle Drew character, and he agrees to play for his team, and they return to Rucker Park and have this big, like, basketball tournament. But yeah, if you like modern day basketball players and Lil Rel Howery, maybe take a turn watching this one. But I'm definitely going to put Above the Rim above Uncle Drew.
Above the Rim above?
Yes. And the final matchup of the second round is Space Jam 1996 versus White Man Can't Jump. And we just talked about Space Jam not really being that great, even though it does have a nostalgic stranglehold of the 90s for a lot of people. But White Man Can't Jump is much better. So now we have our last 4 films to determine who wins this region. So we have He Got Game versus Blue Chips, and we have Above the Rim versus White Men Can't Jump. So He Got Game versus Blue Chips. These are both directed by auteurs, if you will. We have Spike Lee of He Got Game, and we have William Friedkin for Blue Chips. And they both go into the process of college basketball recruiting. I think I'm going to give the slight edge to Blue Chips here. I'll go over my He Got Game rundown. Basically, you have Denzel Washington. He's playing this guy who is in prison for accidentally killing his wife. And he's given a temporary work release for 3 days so he can convince his son, who's the best high school basketball player, to go to the governor's alma mater, which is titled Big State, which is obviously a fake college. But he's trying to get his son to go to Big State, and his son's name is Jesus Shuttlesworth, played by Ray Allen, a real NBA player. There's a lot of flashback sequences that show Denzel being a hard father and teaching his young son how to play basketball. But most of the movie revolves around Ray Allen's character. There's one visit to a college campus. He goes to Tech. And of course, if you know anything about colleges, there's a million different techs. But this one's just called Tech, and he goes there, and Rick Fox is there, and he's another NBA player who's actually turned into an actor in different movies. And he basically walks around the campus with Ray Allen, and there's like this dorm room sequence where he goes in, and there's these two half-naked ladies just in the bed waiting for Ray Allen. Because they're like, if you come to Tech, you get all the girls, and it's pretty funny. But then there's this subplot where Denzel's character, if he's not interacting with Ray Allen, he's basically at this motel, and the neighboring tenant in the motel is like this pimp and his prostitute lady, and it's played by Mila Jovovich, who's the woman from the Resident Evil films. They kind of have like a romantic thing for a few scenes, and it just doesn't land for me, and ultimately she just like, nothing really good or bad happens. She just kind of leaves the movie. And then, they say Jesus Shuttlesworth got his name from not actual Jesus, but from this guy, Earl Monroe, who's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, and he played in the 70s. And his nickname was Black Jesus. But basically the movie ends with Denzel challenging his son to a final game of one-on-one. And Jesus wins and decides to go to Big State, and Denzel has to go back to jail, and that's kind of the movie. I would say, like, if this wasn't directed by Spike Lee, and if you just watch this as a movie, as a basketball movie, I feel like it loses points. But because it's directed by Spike Lee, you're like, oh, it's Spike Lee, and like, oh, it's good, and yeah, I like it, but like, something felt missing. Like, it didn't feel as authentic as Blue Chips. Like, Blue Chips, we'll get to in a minute, but it actually has real colleges, even though the main college is a fictional one. But I think what also hurt He Got Game, it was more of just like a Denzel father-son movie than a, like, I'm great at basketball and I'm going to win all these high school games and do the whole college thing. I like that this movie exists. I think it's really good. I just don't think it's great. And I mean, a lot of these movies aren't great, but I felt a little let down by it because I guess I just thought it was going to be a lot better. But it's definitely one I would rewatch. So if we rewatch it and you really like it, I might boost it up. But so then that leads us to Above the Rim versus White Men Can't Jump. I'm going to have White Men Can't Jump win this round. Above the Rim, this is the one with Tupac. It's actually, what's the interesting one about this, or one of the interesting things, is the screenwriter, Barry Michael Cooper from New York. He wrote New Jack City, which is literally one of my 5 favorite films ever. this movie Sugar Hill, which I actually haven't seen, and then Above the Rim, and he calls it his Harlem trilogy. New Jack City has a few basketball sequences where they're just playing, but it's not an actual basketball movie. But Above the Rim is legitimately a basketball movie, and it's about this talented high school player. He wants a scholarship to Georgetown. His best friend is Marlon Wayans in this movie, and Marlon Wayans is trying to become a drug lackey for Tupac. Tupac plays Birdie, who is kind of like a drug dealer in Harlem. Yeah, this one actually had a lot more drama than I was expecting. There was a lot of subplots and different characters. Like the main guy's mom is widowed, and there's like these two former high school players who still live in the area. One of them works as a security guard for the school. The other one is a homeless man around the school, played by Bernie Mac. Flip is his character's name. But it's kind of like the ups and downs of your high school days, trying to figure out what kind of person you're going to become. But he ultimately wants to play basketball for Georgetown. But, you know, there's these issues. There's like the one thing that kind of had me a little confused was, so like he plays high school basketball and there's sequences where he's like doing high school games, but then the movie ends on this like kind of like pro-am style tournament on the outside court, and the whole time he's like debating on if he should play for his high school coach's team or Tupac's team, and Tupac is one of the coaches. So he decides to go for the Tupac team, but then he changes his mind before the game and is like, this isn't what I want to do. And he plays for his coach's team. The whole movie, Tupac is like clowning on Marlon Wayans and is like, you shouldn't belong here. Like, we don't really want you here. And one of Tupac's, like his second guy is the guy in Remember the Titans who plays, Julius in that movie. He plays a character called Motal. His name it's Wood Harris, the actor. But basically, it's like crazy at the end. The last like 5+ minutes of this movie is pretty crazy because like they do this tournament outside, and the main character, Kyle Lee Watson, he basically wins the tournament, and then Tupac's like, you gotta take care of this guy. And so Wood Harris comes in with his gun in broad daylight and this group of all these people and just tries to shoot this Kyle Lee Watson guy. And then the security guard character, Shep, he like basically dives and saves him from the bullet and has to recover. But then Marlon Wayans goes and shoots Tupac at the end. Spoiler alert. But it was very gritty, very like real. Like it had kind of a few beats like New Jack City, where you're like, you feel like you're in the community while you're watching it. Like you're like there. It's hard to explain, but it's definitely one I would rewatch. I just don't think it's better than White Men Can't Jump. So that gives us our last two films to deep dive in, which will be Blue Chips and White Men Can't Jump. I watched Blue Chips for the first time a few weeks ago. This is directed by William Friedkin, who did, The Exorcist, The French Connection, Sorcerer, a lot of big movies in the 70s. This is from 1994. And it's funny, as I'm doing this, I just realized that Ron Shelton is the writer for both White Men Can't Jump and Blue Chips. But White Men Can't Jump, he also directed. So for Blue Chips, it's a great start to the movie. You just turn it on and you're in this halftime speech where Nick Nolte is the coach. And he's just very angry and is like, you guys suck, we need to do better. And he's basically the college coach of this Western University, a fictional college in LA. And it's insinuated that they've won some tournaments in the past, but they've been bad recently, and all the other good programs are paying for players, and this is in the 90s. So, like, current day, if you were a college basketball coach, you have all these, like, NIL, name, image, and likeness deals that you can do for players so they can get money but still play for your team. But back in the 90s, if you paid anyone $10, you would get violations and all this stuff. So this Nick Nolte coach guy, he was like very strict. I'm never paying players. We don't do that here. And it's called blue chips because he needs more blue chip prospects. It's kind of a term synonymous in the recruiting realm where if you're very, very good, you're a blue chip player. So they basically have a losing season, and now it's the off season, and he's trying to get, blue chip players, one of which is Shaquille O'Neal, along with Penny Hardaway is also in this. And a lot of real life college coaches are in this. So like there's a sequence where they play Indiana at the end, like actual Indiana University with Bob Knight. That was cool. Larry Bird's in it for a minute. Bob Cousy, who's a 1950s NBA player. He's like an older man in this movie as the athletic director. But yeah, I really like this movie. It's definitely for its time. Like, you couldn't make this now, like I said, because the college basketball landscape is completely different. But there's like parts of this movie where he's like trying to give a tractor to the father of this good high school player, and there's a part where he realizes one of his senior players kind of cheated in one game a few years ago, and he like can't mentally get over that. And so I think it's a good character study on the coach, and they really went all out on the production. Like, they made a real basketball court that says Western University on it, even though it's a fake college, and they play multiple games. And there's many scenes where they're like going in and out of the gym, and so like I think it's just a little bit better than He Got Game, because like I said, He Got Game, there's not as much basketball, and I think in Blue Chips, I think it just has a better blend of drama mixed with actual basketball content. But I think ultimately I'm going to pick White Man Can't Jump as the winner of this bracket, and it's the only movie of the 16 that I've gave 4.5 stars or better. All these other ones were 4 stars or worse. I've only seen it once, so I think I'll probably rewatch it in the next few weeks to determine if it's going to ultimately win this entire thing. But White Man Can't Jump, this is the 1992 film starring Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson. And basically, Woody Harrelson is a broke, down on his luck white boy, and he hustles street ballers and like pretends he's bad at basketball, bets money, and then beats him at basketball type of thing. And he befriends Wesley Snipes' character Sydney. And basically, I mean, without getting too much into the details of the plot, they just go to a 2-on-2 tournament, and they have to win the tournament to get money. Rosie Perez plays Woody Harrelson's girlfriend named Gloria. That's a very big part of the movie where they're like making out and fighting about money. It felt like a real relationship, and it felt like the stakes were very high because if they don't win this money, like, they're going to lose their apartment or potentially have to break up. And I think it melds the cultures of, black and white friendships and how basketball can enable growth in that area and symmetry. And there's definitely some different back and forths that go on based on their race. And obviously the title's White Man Can't Jump. They actually also made a video game about it in 1995, which I found funny because there wasn't a lot of 1995 video games back then. But yeah, I think when I rewatch this, and hopefully if I watch it with you, and you'll have a better idea of what I'm talking about. But yeah, I started this bracket kind of like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to go with White Men Can't Jump, and then I I thought Blue Chips and He Got Game would be very strong competition, and then when I watched Above the Rim, I thought it was close. And I think if we're talking Blue Chips versus Above the Rim, I don't know which way I would go. I maybe would go Blue Chips. But ultimately, White Men Can't Jump is just a little bit better, and the vibes in that movie are very good. And they just get straight into the basketball part of it, where it's like I said, so many of these movies are just like gimmicky, where it's just like, oh, we're in high school and I have this secret thing that just happened and now I can play good, but then I can't play good and I have to win on my own talent. Whereas White Man Can't Jump is just like, I'm trying to hustle people, but I'm also trying to make friends and make money, and it felt like a real life scenario more so than a silly kids movie or just a silly I got magic shoes or Kevin Durant's talent type of thing. So, yep, that kind of concludes our first little section here. I'm sorry if I'm just me rambling for 40 minutes, but
a man who's passionate about the game and about the films that document it.
Yeah, I'm excited we have our first Final Four participant, and hopefully we'll do one more of these in the next week or so, and then by the end of June for sure. I'm hoping to get by the end of the NBA Finals all these pushed out. So thanks for listening.
Bye.